Evan Carter pushed open the massive glass doors of the tech headquarters he now owned, his reflection stretching across the polished surface, like a ghost from a past life. The lobby was cold, silver, and humming with the soft vibration of servers behind distant walls. As he stepped inside, the room didn't welcome him. It reacted to him. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A printer beeped and then went silent, as if even a machine sensed attention. Eyes followed him, cautious, curious, and slightly afraid. These were the people who once laughed at him in school hallways, who whispered that he would never become anything. Now, after years away, he wasn't the skinny, quiet boy anymore. He was a man who had just purchased the empire they worked for. His face stayed unreadable, carved with calm fury, while behind him, the glass doors shut like fate locking into place. Evan walked toward the executive conference room with slow, deliberate steps, each one echoing like the countdown to a long-awaited reckoning. The door slid open, revealing faces he knew too well. The same smirks, the same arrogance, now softened with adult stress and unspoken regret. There was Jake, his cousin, leaning back in a leather chair he once bragged he'd earned through merit, though everyone knew it was family privilege. Their eyes met, and a flash of old humiliation hit Evan. Laughter in school corridors, cruel jokes at family gatherings, the constant reminder that he was a failure of the Carter bloodline. But today, the power dynamic had inverted so sharply it almost felt unreal. Evan took his seat at the head of the table, his presence instantly filling the room, and for the first time, the people who had mocked him didn't know whether to stand, speak, or stay silent. Jake forced out a weak laugh when the silence became unbearable. What are you doing here?" he asked, though the tremble in his voice betrayed the false bravado. Evan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a leather folder on the table. Its gold-stamped documents, sliding across the polish, were like the final move in a game long played. "I'm your new boss," he said quietly, letting the words settle into the air like cold smoke. Every face froze. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if gravity itself had thickened. Jake's mouth opened, then closed, his confidence collapsing under the weight of reality. Evan leaned forward slightly, his eyes colder than he ever allowed himself to be in the past. "You laughed at me once," he said. "Let me tell you how we got here." And with that, the screen of time pulled back, dragging the audience into his past. Evan Carter's childhood home was not filled with warmth or encouragement. It was built from quiet dread and constant criticism. His father, Martin, carried disappointment like a second skin, slamming it onto Evan with every glare, every remark. Useless, weak, good for nothing. These were Martin's greetings, not insults. His mother, Cheryl, floated to the house like a shadow, too afraid to defend her son or confront her husband. Her silence hurt even more than Martin's words. It taught Evan that even the people who were supposed to love him wouldn't stand up for him. Then came the regular visits from Aunt Ruth and Cousin Jake, whose laughter carried knives. They mocked Evan's dream of building an app, calling him delusional. "You? Invent something?" Ruth would grin. "You can't even make eye contact." Their words cut so deep that Evan began shrinking into the background, believing invisibility was safer than hope. School should have been an escape for Evan, but it became an extension of the same cruelty he endured at home. He was quiet, introverted, and often lost in thoughts of code and algorithms, qualities that made him an easy target. Kids mocked him for eating lunch alone, for carrying a laptop everywhere, for preferring the computer lab to the playground. Even teachers dismissed him. One afternoon, while he passionately explained an idea for a digital security tool, his teacher interrupted with a laugh. "Evan, you'll never make money sitting behind a screen all day." The class snickered, and Evan felt something inside him crack. Not his dream, but his trust in the world around him. Instead of breaking him, these experiences pushed him deeper into his work. The more they ridiculed him, the more he coded, building invisible armor from lines of logic and late-night determination. Evan's dream crystallized the day he witnessed a quiet classmate break down after being tormented online. He saw the raw damage digital cruelty could cause and wanted to build something that protected people like her, like himself. But when he shared this idea at dinner, his family burst into laughter. Jake clapped sarcastically. Ruth nearly choked on her food. Martin said, You can't even defend yourself in real life. How will you protect anyone online? The humiliation burned into Evan's memory, but instead of extinguishing his dream, it fueled it. Retreating to his room each night, he surrounded himself with hope taped to the walls. Sketches, diagrams, quotes, lines of code scribbled on sticky notes. His room became his universe, the only place where he wasn't invisible. Every insult became motivation. Every doubt became data. Every night, Evan built a foundation of the empire that would one day silence them all. For the first time in his life, Evan felt like the world had finally opened a door for him. The acceptance email from the College Tech Accelerator felt unreal, glowing on his cracked laptop screen like a promise he had waited his whole life to hear. He imagined classrooms where people spoke the same language he did, mentors who wouldn't laugh at his ideas, opportunities that could finally pull him out of the shadows. But when he rushed to tell his father, breathless with hope, Martin didn't even look up from the TV. A tech accelerator? He scoffed. I won't waste money on your delusions. The words hit harder than any slap. Evan's excitement collapsed in his chest, replaced with a burning humiliation. His mother didn't speak. She just stared at her hands. In that moment, the acceptance felt less like a victory and more like a cruel reminder that his own family never believed he deserved a future point 2 days later. Hope died completely. Evan discovered a folder missing from his desk, the one containing his rough sketches for the safety tech project he'd been building for years. Panicked, he searched everywhere. When he finally confronted Jake during a family gathering, Jake didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked, holding a printed version of Evan's stolen designs. Ideas don't belong to nobodies, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Evan froze. Jake had submitted Evan's early prototypes as his own, and the program had accepted him. When the family heard, they didn't comfort Evan, they celebrated Jake. Ruth hugged her son proudly. Martin clapped Jake on the back. At least someone in this family is ambitious. Evan stood in the corner, invisible again, while his stolen future danced in Jake's hands. The humiliation was so sharp it felt physical, like something inside him was finally beginning to fracture. For 18 years, Evan had swallowed every insult, every laugh, every dismissal. But that night, something inside him finally snapped. The room was buzzing with praise for Jake when Evan's voice suddenly cut through the noise, trembling but loud. He stole my work, he shouted. The room fell silent. Jake rolled his eyes, Ruth scoffed, but Martin stood up slowly, fury radiating off him. Enough, he thundered. Stop embarrassing yourself. Evan didn't stop. Years of silence erupted in seconds. Anger, desperation, heartbreak. And then Martin's hand cracked across Evan's face. The room gasped. Cheryl murmured, "Don't embarrass yourself, Evan," as if his pain was an inconvenience. That was the moment something inside him died. Not hope, but the belief that this was his family. Evan walked to his room, packed a small backpack with clothes, a notebook, and his laptop. At 18, he stepped into the night and promised himself he would never return until the world knew his name. Evan's early years on his own felt like walking through storms with no shelter. He drifted between cheap, peeling-wall hostel rooms, the kind that smelled of damp carpets and loneliness. By day, he worked survival jobs, bussing tables, lifting boxes in warehouses, sweeping floors after office hours. By night, he coded until his fingers trembled and his eyes stung with exhaustion. Every rejection email stung like a fresh bruise. Investors saying he lacked charisma, that he wasn't CEO material, that someone like him couldn't lead a startup. They never knew he slept 3 hours a night or lived off instant noodles. They never saw him cry quietly in stairwells after another meeting where he wasn't taken seriously. Yet he absorbed every humiliation like fuel. Every insult sparked a new line of code. Every closed door strengthened his resolve. Pain became energy. Failure became momentum. Evan was quietly building himself in the dark point one night during his janitorial shift at a small community college. Evan sat on a stairwell with his laptop open, coding through sheer willpower. He didn't notice Dr. Amelia Harper, a respected professor known for nurturing underdogs, watching him from the hallway. Instead of scolding him for working on the job, she walked closer, studying the fast, precise rhythm of his fingers. "What are you building?" she asked gently. Evan froze, expecting another dismissal. But when he explained his digital safety tool, she didn't laugh or interrupt. She listened, really listened. Dr. Harper saw not a tired janitor, but mind sharpening itself in the shadows. She invited him for coffee, read his notes, and within days introduced him to an angel investor who owed her a favor. For the first time, someone with influence believed in him. Her kindness cracked open a new path in a world that had always been cruel. With the investor's help, Evan built his first real prototype, a sleek, efficient digital safety tool that quietly began circulating in small online communities. He finally tasted momentum. Then, like a shadow returned to block the sun, Jake resurfaced, this time with a cheap, rush knockoff of Evan's concept, plastered online with flashy marketing and stolen ideas. The public didn't know the truth. Investors were confused. Evan felt the old pain return, that familiar, suffocating sense of being robbed, erased, overshadowed. For 2 days, he shut down, convinced the universe simply wasn't built for people like him. That's when Dr. Harper arrived at his cramped workspace, placed a steady hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "Your pain is real, but so is your power." Those words rewired something inside Evan. He wiped his tears, reopened his laptop, and made a choice. He wouldn't run this time. He would fight. Harder than ever. Evan's life changed overnight. Not because of luck, but because the world finally caught up to brilliance he had been building in silence for years. A major influencer posted a heartfelt video explaining how Evan's app had prevented a cyberstalker from harming her friend. Within hours, the clip exploded across the internet. Downloads skyrocketed. News outlets requested interviews. Investors who once dismissed Evan suddenly emailed him at midnight begging for meetings. But Evan remained disciplined, almost surgical. He didn't celebrate. He didn't brag. He focused. Every update he released made the app smoother, faster, smarter. Users praised his transparency, his mission, his soul. Within a year, Evan wasn't just a rising name in tech. He was a storm the industry couldn't ignore. People who once mocked him now quoted him. People who doubted him now sought his approval. Evan had become unstoppable, and he did it without needing anyone's permission. While Evan's empire grew stronger, Jake's began to crumble like a poorly built replica collapsing under its own weight. Investors who once praised him grew impatient. Users complained about bugs, crashes, weak security, the very flaws Evan had warned Jake about years ago. Eventually, Jake's company bled money so fast the board panicked. Desperate, they sought a buyout. Ironically, the buyout landed on the desk of Evan's investment advisors, who recognized a strategic opportunity. The board, unaware of the family history, saw Evan as a brilliant young CEO capable of saving the sinking ship. Papers were signed quietly, efficiently. By the time Jake realized whose name was printed on the acquisition contract, it was too late. The company he built on stolen ideas now belonged to the one person he had always tried to bury. Fate didn't just circle back. It delivered poetic justice on a silver platter. When Evan called an emergency all-staff meeting, the building buzzed with confusion. Employees whispered, anxious, as they filed into the conference room. At the head of the long table sat Evan, calm, composed, powerful. When Jake walked in and saw him, his face drained of color. It was the first time in their lives the roles were reversed. Evan didn't raise his voice. He didn't smirk. He simply looked at Jake with the weight of a man who had survived storms Jake could never comprehend. "I warned you," Evan said softly. "The world is small and success is loud." Jake broke, begging for another chance, voice shaking. But Evan refused, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that cut deeper than any insult. He dismissed Jake privately, sparing him the humiliation he himself had once endured. True power, Evan realized, wasn't cruelty. It was control, and he finally had it. Once the acquisition dust settled, Evan rebuilt the company from the inside out. He wasn't interested in revenge anymore. He was interested in impact. The first thing he did was dismantle the toxic structures that had allowed corruption, favoritism, and shortcuts to thrive. He implemented strict ethical innovation policies, ensuring no idea would ever be stolen again, no voice dismissed because it belonged to someone quiet, and no talent overlooked simply because it didn't come wrapped in confidence. Employees were surprised. Instead of the ruthless CEO the rumors promised, Evan was exact, calm, and visionary. He listened more than he spoke. He rewarded integrity, creativity, and courage. Under his leadership, work felt meaningful again. Investors called him a rising titan. Industry people called him a disruptor. His team called him the leader they wished they'd had years earlier. And for the first time, Evan built something without needing to prove anything to anyone as Evan's reputation spread. His past eventually caught its way back to him. His father called late one evening, the same number that once delivered nothing but disappointment. Evan saw the caller ID, felt the familiar tightening in his chest, and let it ring until it stopped. For the first time, ignoring him didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. Later, a message arrived from his mother, a short, trembling apology. "We didn't see who you were. I'm sorry." Evan stared at the text for a long time. A bruise he thought had hardened completely seemed to soften, just slightly. But forgiveness didn't mean surrender. He didn't go back. Not yet. He didn't need validation from the people who once crushed him. Instead, he allowed something gentler to settle in his heart. The realization that it had outgrown the smallness of the world he came from. Late one night, Evan stood alone in his new corner office, overlooking the glowing cityscape that stretched endlessly beneath him. The glass reflected a man he barely recognized. No longer the quiet boy who hid in his room. No longer the teenager who left home with a single backpack. No longer the young man coding through exhaustion in cheap hostels. This version of himself was forged, refined, and unbreakable. He pressed a hand to the window and exhaled, letting the weight of his journey settle into something lighter. He had survived every insult, every rejection, every betrayal meant to destroy him, and he had turned them into momentum. This wasn't victory over Jake or Martin or the past. This was victory over the version of himself who once believed he wasn't enough. Evan smiled softly. He didn't just succeed. He reclaimed himself. The building was silent when Evan finally stepped out of the boardroom. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but earned. As he walked down the executive hallway, he passed the office that once belonged to Jake. The lights were off. The nameplate had already been removed. The room was hollow, stripped of the arrogance, noise, and stolen ambition that once filled it. Evan paused at the doorframe, not out of spite, but reflection. This room, this moment, symbolized something deeper than revenge. It was closure without cruelty. He walked into his own office, the one overlooking the entire city, and sat at his desk. Slowly, he pulled out an old notebook, the same battered one he carried as a lonely teenager, filled with sketches, hopes, and dreams no one believed in. On the first blank page, he wrote 7 words. They laughed. I worked. I won. Evan leaned back in his chair, let his fingers rest on the notebook's worn cover. He remembered every version of himself that had carried this dream. The boy who hid from his father's rage, the teenager coding in secret, the young man sweeping floors while building his future line by line. All those shadows had walked with him into this office. For the first time, he didn't fear them. He honored them. The window reflected both the man he had become and the child he once was, standing side by side, reconciled. The city lights twinkled below like constellations, each one representing 1,000 stories he hadn't yet lived. Evan didn't need applause, congratulations, or revenge. What filled him instead was a rare, quiet warmth. The realization that he had changed his entire destiny with nothing but persistence, pain, and a vision nobody else could see. The night embraced the skyline as Evan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, the soft glow outlining his silhouette like a final frame in a long, hard-won story. His face was calm, almost serene, not triumphant, not bitter, just complete. The weight he carried for years had finally melted into something gentle. A single tear slipped down his cheek, not born from wounds, but from closure, the kind that arrives when you finally understand you were never a problem, only the unrecognized potential. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside his office, time slowed. Evan whispered a quiet thank you to the past that forged him, to the pain that shaped him, and to the future he had built with his own hands. He closed his notebook, exhaled softly, and let the peace settle into his bones.